Thank you much. I always feel like I should run out with like hands up and things during introductions. So a brief introduction to myself. Brandon Taylor, as you can see, assistant professor at Fresno State in the Recreation Administration Department. I coordinate our community recreation and youth services option within our department there. I worked 14 years in the field after I graduated in the Central Valley, but I got my start in a little town called Walnut Creek. So I went to high school in Walnut Creek and then got my first job working at the Foothill Middle School, doing scorekeeping and all of those first job types of things. So today what we're going to talk about is really serving with modesty. And how can we do that? I love the previous discussions because it all lends to what I'm discussing as well. So reaching out to the community, looking at the abilities of individuals and kind of the individuality that we have. So the title's a little bit misleading because we're all prejudiced, right? So a visualization I'd like for you to do is we all got here, I'm assuming via car, vehicle of some sort, right? I traveled down from Fresno up to here this morning. I did a lot of prejudging on my way, all right? So the exercise I like to use in my class is imagine you're coming up to a red light. There's two lanes in the direction that you're going. There's a big rig in one lane, and there's a Ferrari in the other lane. Which vehicle are you getting behind? I know which one I'm getting behind, right? It's the big, no, it's not the big rig, right? It's the Ferrari. Why? Because we assume that that car is going to go faster than the big rig. And obviously it can go faster than the big rig. Anyone ever gotten behind that Ferrari, but the big rig goes faster, right? So we all prejudge on a daily basis. And as we heard earlier, it's not necessarily a bad thing that we have those such biases and prejudgments, but it's how we utilize those as we do the work that we do. So during my conversation, it's not only for us individually, but also looking in terms of the services that we provide to the communities that we serve. So we're going to look at this continuum of cultural competence. And I don't really like the term cultural competence because I don't think it's very easy to be competent in anyone's culture, right? I don't feel like I'm competent in African American or Black culture, right? Because there's such difference and nuance within that particular culture. How we do things here in California are much different than my family in Louisiana does things, right? So just kind of to put that. I do like, well, we'll get to that in a second. All right. So with those prejudgments that we have, within this continuum, we have, which I think we can all agree, the destructive type that we try to stay away from. Right, so we've got assimilation, and also look at the programs that we offer as well, and the services that we provide. Right, so oftentimes we force individuals within our communities into these boxes with the services that we provide. And that's something that I think we need to look at a little bit more. I know we all do needs assessments and customer service satisfaction types of things, but I think we can get a little bit deeper than that. Right, so really we're going to focus on these dominant groups within whatever community. So it's not just here in America, the dominant culture is the white culture, but if we take that culture, if we take this discussion to another culture, that would be the dominant culture, right? So my little guy here says, no, we're going to move on beyond this destructive portion here and get into our cultural incapacity. Right, so this is where we take those prejudgments and we continue to place them onto others. So you see stereotypes, you see racism, unfair practices as a whole. This one's focusing on hiring practices based on those prejudgments. All right. So again, my little guy says, no, and you can see he's got a goal that's going along with him because this next area is where society tells us that we should be, right, which I don't necessarily agree with and we'll discuss shortly. All right, so this cultural blindness area is generally what our culture in America says that we should look at individuals, right? And we should treat them all the same, which I don't, for myself, particularly buy into. So I've got the nice red X, right? But we shouldn't treat everyone the same, all right? And I'll get into that in a little bit. So I got another guy says, no, okay, if that's not the goal, maybe this next area is the goal. Where we look at pre-competence, and we start to get a perspective and some understanding about the different cultures that we are immersed in. Also look at the needs of the individuals and the organization as well. So as we look at serving our communities, are we working to serve everyone in our community? Right. The example I use is our department does some work with a small community down in the Central Valley. And we were sitting down with some of the decision makers about the services that they offer and so on and so forth. And they said, soccer. We can offer soccer all day, every day, and it is full. Right? If they could do 24 hours of soccer, they would have full programs. They don't have enough fields, the facilities to be able to offer as much soccer as that community would like to participate in. This particular community is about 90% Hispanic Latino population, right, background, as they identify. So I asked them, what are some of the other cultures or groups that reside in your community? And another was the Punjabi, Indian Punjabi group. And I said, well, have you checked with them to see exactly what they like to participate in? Because I don't know whether or not they like to participate in soccer. They may, and if they do, you've got the programs for them. But there may be other programming that you can provide that's going to meet their needs a little bit better and a little bit more specifically. Right? So they said, no, we've never really gone and done any type of surveying in that manner because we focus on here, right? Treating everyone the same. We send out the survey, we get it back, and I said, well, think about the results that you're getting is going to be primarily from one group. It's going to overshadow that smaller group. So even if we look at revenue generation as one of the key areas that we need to maintain, we have this opportunity to potentially add revenue by offering additional programming, right? By meeting the needs of that particular community. So this is a good place for us to start, right? Start to explore the different cultures, the issues, and start to become committed in identifying and really seeing who's in our communities. So again, my little guy is working them overtime, and we get to the next, which is the cultural competence. Right? And again, I mentioned I don't particularly like this particular term just because we can't be competent in everyone's culture, but we can learn, we can explore, we can recognize the differences that we have within our communities. Right? And we all have differences. Just in this room, we have various differences. From racial, ethnic, from gender specific, and so on and so forth. Careers, which area of programming or services are you involved in? Right? So we've got to figure out, again, my guy's working, he's working, what's beyond this cultural competence, and really we're looking at cultural humility. All right? And it starts with this perspective that everyone within our communities, and I think this is inherently encompassed within our services, but really come to an understanding that everyone within our community is part of this global community, right? And they're a valued member of our community. We should get their perspectives on programs, specifically for individual groups of within our population. But that everyone has something to give, everyone has equal value, we should be lifelong learners. And I love this piece here because conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. Right? We're going to have cultural conflicts. I grew up a certain way, my wife grew up a different way. We had to figure out how are we going to raise our 3 kids, right? And me having to let go of some of the things that traditionally were done in African American household, my wife having to figure out what's been done in more of an Italian, Native American household, and trying to figure out what that was, right? So we start to look at how can we work through these conflicts within the different cultures that we have. Additionally, there's these 3 levels of cultural humility as well. And we need to do a lot of work in this individual area, where particularly we focus on a lot of self-reflection, having an understanding of ourselves so that we can then have an understanding of others as well. right? And then we get into the interpersonal, so starting to have connection with others who may look like us, who may not look like us, who may have the same background or may not, right? But getting this understanding and this communication where we're starting to see others. And this is the part that I love about cultural humility. We see each other, right? Once we get to the interpersonal, we get through to the collective, and then we really start to emphasize value of the diversity that we have in our communities. And I think this is where we need to do a lot of work, not only in our agencies, but in our country, right? Is valuing the differences that we have, the different cultures that are included, and the adaptations that can be made to include everyone within our communities. Right? But build relationships based on that mutuality, right? That we're both here to present something, to move something forward, to provide some kind of service, and I need your help in figuring out what is it that you want to participate in so that I can then facilitate that type of programming. And then the third bullet here is the contextual influences. So what are the rules, the procedures? Sometimes we need to look at how we're charging for our programs to have more equity for individuals within our communities. And that's a tough conversation that we won't have in this particular discussion, right? But what does it look like to register for your programs? If you have reduced costs for individuals, are you really promoting that out there? Or is it just a sign that's on the wall somewhere within your office that says, hey, if you happen to see this, we've got this program that might work for you, right? And again, collectively, trying to meet the needs of everyone within our community. So here's where we get to culturally proficient, and we start to implement changes based on the cultural needs of those within our communities, right? And I don't know what that looks like because I haven't surveyed everyone in our communities, right? But you can think about it in terms of what does this group enjoy participating in? Is it the same as another group? If it's not, let's figure out what this group wants to participate in. And I know that makes a challenge for facilitating programming, right? But if in our mission, there's something in it about meeting the needs of our communities and those who live in our communities, shouldn't we really get to the bottom of their needs so that we're providing those programming? Oftentimes, we get stuck here, right? Treating everyone as a homogeneous group, right? And we kind of force a little bit of assimilation because these are the programs we're running, these are the programs we ran for the last 25 years, these are the programs we're going to continue to run. All right, so we really want to get to this cultural proficiency, and this is where cultural humility lives, right, within these three areas. And I love the action verbs here, right? So we're exploring the different issues, cultures, we're recognizing the individuals, and we're implementing changes to make sure we're meeting those needs of the individuals within our communities. So really, as I see it, our goal is here. What changes, if any, need to be made to meet the needs of our community? So in terms of this cultural humility and how do we facilitate this? Through openness, right? We have to ourselves be open to different perspectives, different understandings. How I grew up is different than someone else. Self-awareness, so a lot of self-reflection that takes place. We have to let go of our egos, right? Which oftentimes we're the programmers, we know how to program a program, and we're gonna program this particular program, all right? Supportive interactions with us, between us and our communities. And then again, self-reflection and this critique, right? I'm usually an introvert, I really don't like being up on stages. I love teaching my classes. When I get up here, I hope that my introversion kind of goes away, right? But afterwards, I critique the heck out of myself. Here's what I forgot to say. Here's how my interaction with this student went, how with one of my coworkers, and so on and so forth, right? So in this self-reflection exercise that we can do, 4 key areas in that which we need to focus on. So what are the beliefs and values that we have, not only for ourselves, but in the services and programs and activities, events that we facilitate? What's the meaning of recreation, right, for us? What are those cultural identities that we have so that we have a little bit better understanding of ourselves and then open ourselves up to others? What are the personal biases and assumptions that we have, which again, we all have them, right? And it's hopefully we can keep those inside, as our first speaker today mentioned. When I talk about diversity and breaking down systematic racism and things like that, I say I'm not really concerned with changing what's going on in here. I'm concerned with changing what's going on in here and how those go into actions on the outside. Right? So what are those and how can we address those? And then challenge the things that we consider the norm, which again we heard earlier in today's session. Right? And we typically think of ourselves as being the norm. Right? And everything outside of ourselves is not the norm. So how can we look to kind of break that down a little bit as we work with our communities? So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is just a short quote. Culture of humility incorporates a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation, self-critique, and redressing the power imbalances in the program service provider relationship or dynamic, and to develop mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic social and advocacy partnerships with the communities on behalf of the individuals and the defined populations. Right? So really, how do we work with each other, not being the dad, where's my paternalistic, right? Not being the overseer of our communities, but really getting a perspective of what it is that they want. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that. A lot of insight there.
Thanks.
All right. Do we have questions? All right. Let's get this started.
Hi, Brandon. This one's kind of a broad question,
Sure.
but do you have any suggestions for how to push forward on that cultural competencies in our hiring practices?
Yeah, that one's a tough one. In part because of what is normal and what's normalized, right? So what we consider to be appropriate within the interview process as well as the systems that we have within our organization. I think really reaching out to different communities is important, right? So those communities within your community, those smaller subsets of communities within your communities. And really letting individuals know that you truly are vested in diversity, not just because it's a saying on a wall somewhere or it's in the city charter or wherever it may be, but that you really have an interest in bringing in that individual's perspectives. Right? So I think that's really the tough part, is that oftentimes you get an employee and you say, okay, here's what we're gonna do, here's the programs that you have, here's what you're gonna be facilitating. And I think oftentimes we don't necessarily use their talents as much as we should in reaching out to the community and as well as different programs to facilitate. Yeah, the hiring is a tough one.
Other questions?
Thanks, Brandon. Do you have any strategies to offer about reaching out to specific communities? Like, I know it's important to reach out to different community organizations
Sure.
who already have those partnerships developed.
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to do is let those communities know that we're open to their input. And then reaching out to like your service organizations, churches for certain groups, affinity groups within your community. I would definitely start there. Oftentimes we haven't done that individual reach out to those groups. So they don't really know, from my perspective, they don't really know that you want or that we want that information from them so that we can facilitate more events, programs, and services. And finding an in, right? So finding someone who's connected that you know, or you know someone who knows someone. We just talked about 6 degrees of separation in my class the other day. But finding someone who can get you into the door so that you can have those conversations. And then the key, just like with any survey needs assessment, is once you get that information, you implement that information, right? So just getting information and saying, oh yeah, we've heard from the Hispanic population within our community. They want these programs and so on and so forth. and we say, hey, that's great. We're going to continue doing what we normally do, right? Because then they feel a little bit jaded and used from that perspective. So I think really it's the going out and talking to those groups once you identify them within your community, and let them know that you're earnestly seeking their input.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.